Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at a situation in the Horn of Africa that is, well, it's a masterclass in how two groups of people can see the exact same facts and come away with completely opposite realities.
It really is.
We're talking about Turkey's massive involvement in Somalia.
And it's such a fascinating case study because if you read, the standard international reports or you talk to policymakers in Ankara or Mogadishu, Turkey's role in Somalia since about 2011 it's the gold standard.
A huge success story.
A huge success story. They went in when the country was just labeled a failed state. They built roads, hospitals, they got the trash collected. I mean, they helped a collapsed nation get back on its knees.
Right, and that's the narrative that most of us know. Turkey as this benevolent actor stepping in where the West was afraid to go. But today we are flipping that script. We're digging into a piece by Brendan J. Cannon called Contextualizing Turkey's Actions in Somalia, Insights from Somaliland.
And his argument is just so powerful.
It is. He says that if you travel just a few hundred miles north to Somaliland, that same success story starts to look terrifyingly like an existential threat.
Exactly. Cannon's work is vital because it just shifts the camera angle. He's not looking at what Turkey intends to do. He's looking at how those actions are perceived by a very specific group of people who feel like they're in the crosshairs.
So it's a story about how nation building in one place can look a whole lot like nation destroying to the neighbors.
Precisely.
Okay. Before we get into the details, though, we need to lay out the map for you. Because we have Somalia and we have Somaliland.
Yeah.
And to an outsider, maybe looking at a map on their phone, these might seem like the same country. But on the ground, that distinction is everything.
Oh, it is the single defining feature of the region's politics.
Yeah.
You have the federal government of Somalia, based in Mogadishu. This is the government that sits at the UN, has the embassies.
The internationally recognized one.
The internationally recognized sovereign power over the whole territory. But then you have Somaliland in the north.
And Somaliland is so interesting because they declared independence way back in 1991.
They did.
And for over 30 years, they've basically been a separate state. They have their own presidents, they print their own money, they police their own streets.
And in many ways, Somaliland has been more stable, more democratic than the South for decades. But, and this is the massive but,
they're unrecognized.
Completely unrecognized. Internationally, they don't exist as a sovereign state. To the world, and more importantly to Mogadishu, they are just a breakaway province.
A province that needs to be brought back into the fold. So you've got this frozen conflict. Mogadishu says, we are one nation.
And Hargeisa, that's the capital of Somaliland, says, we are independent and we are never, ever going back.
And into this incredibly fragile, tense standoff.
Turkey enters the chat with massive amounts of money, concrete, and guns.
Let's start there with the first major point of friction that Cannon identifies, the One Somalia policy. Now, to play devil's advocate for a second, isn't One Somalia the standard position for everybody?
It is.
The U.S., the UN, they all recognize Mogadishu. So why is Turkey's position such a trigger for Somaliland?
That is the key question. And you're right, diplomatically, Turkey isn't doing anything radical. They're following international law. But the difference, and this is what Cannon highlights, is the application of that policy.
What do you mean?
Well, most Western powers, they pay lip service to One Somalia, but they keep a pretty safe distance. Turkey, on the other hand, is heavily physically involved.
So it's the difference between saying, I support you from afar, and moving into the guest room to help you renovate the entire house.
That's a perfect way to put it. Turkey's engagement is incredibly deep. They aren't just sending ambassadors. They are managing the Mogadishu seaport. They're running the international airport. They're paving the highways.
They're embedded.
They are embedded in the very infrastructure of the Somali state.
And I can see why that would freak Somaliland out. Because if you believe you are an independent country and a foreign power comes in and starts supercharging the government that claims to own you, well, that's not neutral aid anymore. That's taking a side.
It's what Cannon calls a zero-sum game. In Somaliland's view, resources are power. So if Mogadishu gets a new airport terminal, that's not just a nice building, it's economic leverage. If Mogadishu gets better roads, that's logistical capacity.
Right.
Somaliland has three core interests: sovereignty, security, and international recognition. And they believe every single dollar Turkey spends in Mogadishu actively undermines all three.
So in their eyes, a stronger Mogadishu can only mean a weaker Somaliland. There's no rising tide lifts all boats here.
Not in this context, no. Because the political goal of the government in Mogadishu is ultimately reunification. So if Turkey strengthens Mogadishu, they're effectively giving them the muscles to potentially force that reunification.
Wow.
So Somaliland doesn't see a humanitarian actor. They see the chief financier of a government that wants to, in their words, subjugate them.
It just completely reframes the whole concept of development. We think of development as this universal good. I mean, who could hate a hospital? But here, a hospital, a road, it's a weapon.
It's a tool of state consolidation. And if you are resisting that consolidation, then that tool is a direct threat.
But this mistrust, it didn't just appear out of nowhere. Cannon points to a specific period where things went from, say, cautious optimism to total betrayal, the talks between 2013 and 2016.
This was such a critical window. For a moment, it really looked like Turkey might be the peacemaker. They positioned themselves as a neutral broker, and they invited leaders from both Somaliland and Somalia to Ankara for these talks.
And these weren't just photo ops, were they? They were getting into the real nitty-gritty of governance.
They were. I mean, they signed actual technical agreements on really practical issues, things like how to manage airspace, how to coordinate international aid, sharing security intelligence.
The airspace one is huge.
It's fundamental.
Controlling who flies over your territory is Sovereignty 101.
It is. And for a little while, there was hope. But then the agreements just fell apart. The federal government in Somalia basically walked away from the terms. They stopped coordinating on aid. They reneged on the airspace deal.
Okay, but talks break down all the time in diplomacy. Why did this make Somaliland blame Turkey? Shouldn't they just blame Somalia?
But that's the tell, you see. It wasn't the breakdown itself. It was Turkey's reaction to it.
Or lack of reaction.
Exactly. Their silence. When Mogadishu walked away from the deal, Turkey said nothing. Not a word. No public criticism, no pressure to get them back to the table. Nothing.
So the referee watched one team commit a huge foul and just kept their whistle in their pocket.
That's the perfect analogy. And if the ref doesn't call the foul, the other team, well, they assume the game is rigged.
Of course.
To the Somalilanders, that silence was proof. It proved Ankara wasn't a fair broker. It proved they were aligned with Mogadishu all along, and the talks were just for show.
And that really cemented the narrative of betrayal. But if the diplomatic stuff is what made them angry, the next part of Cannon's analysis is what keeps them up at night. We have to talk about the military dimension.
This is the core fear.
Yeah.
You can argue about aid and airspace, but when you start talking about military bases and battalions, the temperature in the room changes completely. And we need to talk about Turksum.
Turksum. It sounds like a tech company, but it's actually a massive Turkish military base in Mogadishu.
It is Turkey's largest overseas military base, and its main function is training. Turkey is training and equipping the Somali National Army.
Yeah.
But we're not just talking about basic training. They are creating elite commando units. They're often called the Gorgor or Eagle units. These are highly capable NATO standard trained forces.
Now, the stated mission here, what Turkey and Somalia say on the record, is that these troops are for fighting al-Shabaab.
Right.
And al-Shabaab is a vicious terrorist organization. So on the surface, this looks like a good thing. Why would Somaliland be terrified of troops who are supposed to be fighting terrorists?
Because capabilities always outlast intentions. Sure, the intention today might be fighting terrorists, but Somaliland looks at those troops, better trained, better equipped, better funded than anything they have, and they ask themselves a very simple question. What happens when al-Shabaab is gone?
Or even before you're gone.
Exactly. Somaliland fears that these elite units are a reunification force in waiting. They worry that once Mogadishu feels strong enough, they will turn those Turkish-trained guns north.
To forcibly bring Somaliland back under their control. And this isn't just paranoia, is it? This is where the history lesson gets really, really grim. Cannon talks about historical trauma.
You absolutely cannot understand this fear without understanding the late 1980s. Under the dictator Siad Barre, the Somali army, controlled from Mogadishu, launched a brutal campaign against the Isaac clan, who are the majority in Somaliland.
They bombed the capital, Hargeisa.
They leveled it, bombed it from the air. Tens of thousands of people were killed. It was a genocide.
So when they see a strong army forming in Mogadishu again, they don't see national defense.
No. They see the ghost of 1988. It's a visceral, deep-seated trauma. So when Turkey hands over modern weapons and trains these elite squads for the government in Mogadishu, from Somaliland's perspective, they're rearming their executioners.
It's not security assistance.
It's preparation for a future war against them.
That is just a terrifying perspective. It completely changes how you view a simple training exercise. It creates this huge power imbalance.
A deeply destabilizing one. Because if one side gets a massive upgrade in firepower, the other side panics. They feel they have to find new allies, buy more weapons. It just creates a security dilemma.
Now, Turkey isn't blind to this. Their diplomats know this tension exists, and the source does mention they try to play both sides a little bit. They have a presence in Somaliland, don't they?
They do. They have a consulate in Hargeisa. They've provided some humanitarian aid, dug some wells, things like that, and they offer university scholarships for Somaliland students.
So they can point to that and say, look, we're not biased. We help everyone.
They can say it. But in Hargeisa, it lands with a thud. Cannon calls this the hollow handshake.
It's tokenism.
It's seen as pure tokenism.
The difference between buying someone a house and buying them a sandwich.
That's a stark way to put it, but yes. When Somaliland compares the few scholarships and small-scale aid they get with the massive infrastructure projects, the budget support, and the military base that Mogadishu gets, it just feels insulting.
Like hush money.
Like crumbs, designed to keep them quiet while the real investment goes to their rival. It actually highlights the bias instead of hiding it.
If you give my enemy a tank and you give me a textbook, you are not neutral.
You are not neutral. The disparity just reinforces the feeling that Turkey has already picked a winner.
So, we have the one Somalia policy undermining their sovereignty, the diplomatic silence undermining their trust, and the military base undermining their very safety. It seems like that bridge has been pretty thoroughly burned.
It has. And this brings us to Cannon's synthesis, the broader lesson here. Because this isn't just about Turkey and Somalia. It's about the danger of state building in a place where the definition of the state is still up for debate.
Right. Turkey's model works fine if you have a unified country. If a country has a natural disaster but everyone agrees on the borders and the government, then building roads and training police is great.
Exactly. But Somalia is, and this is the term Cannon uses, a fragmented and contested political landscape. When the very idea of the country is disputed, you cannot just pour resources into the central government and pretend it's a neutral act.
Because by empowering the center, you are automatically disempowering the periphery. You are tipping the scales in an ongoing civil conflict.
You are perhaps inadvertently picking a winner. And the risk, as Cannon points out, is that Turkey isn't preventing a conflict. They might actually be fueling a future one.
By making Mogadishu strong enough to try and retake Somaliland by force.
Which would be a devastating war. The stability they're building in Mogadishu is creating profound instability in Hargeisa.
It's a paradox.
It is. And the current status is that Somaliland now views Turkey not as a partner, not even as a neutral party, but as an existential threat. And that is heavy language. That means a threat to your very survival.
It's a tragedy of, well, maybe not unintended, but perhaps ignored consequences. A humanitarian mission morphs into a security crisis just by crossing a border that one side says doesn't even exist.
It's a real warning for any foreign power getting involved in complex regions. You have to understand the local history. You have to understand the trauma. You can't just copy-paste a development model and expect it to work the same way everywhere. Context is everything.
It makes you wonder how many other success stories around the world are seen as existential threats by the people living right next door.
It's a question worth asking. The view from the presidential palace is rarely the same as the view from the breakaway region.
I want to leave our listeners with a final thought to mull over. We like to think of aid roads, schools, even military training as being inherently good or at least neutral. A road is just a road, right? But based on what we've talked about today, here's the question. If a foreign power pours resources into a central government that a huge part of a country doesn't recognize, can that aid ever truly be neutral? Or does the simple act of building a road inherently choose a side in a civil war?
It's the ultimate question of intervention. There's no such thing as a neutral dollar in a conflict zone.
Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Always a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.